thank you everybody for your time and your attention. We're really excited to have Steve Landau from Touch Graphics here today. And, Steve, you're one of the first tactile graphic artists and designers that I really got to know at the beginning of my work in this space. I'll let you extend a further introduction to yourself. Thank you so much for being here. Take it away.
I'm super excited to be speaking to everybody. This is a group of superstars in the field. I'm a little nervous, but I hope that you find this interesting. I'm going to be focusing, rather than give you my life story and the general overview of the work, I decided to focus on one particular topic, which I find very interesting, which is this idea of the tactile tablet and how it has evolved in a kind of iterative fashion. It makes a nice case study to look at how design is driven by many different influences. Given enough time, we end up figuring out how to do things, and it gets better and better. I don't think this is at the terminal stage in the design of the tactile tablet. There's many things that we can still do. We're at a good point to examine how this has developed and changed over about 30 years since the idea was first introduced. I'm going to turn on my PowerPoint presentation and go through some of these slides and explain my thinking about this topic. So my name is Steve Landau. I'm the owner of Touch Graphics, and we're going to be talking about how the design of tactile tablets, which is a particular product category, has changed and evolved since the mid-1990s when the first example was introduced. Just to give you one bit of background, Touch Graphics Inc. was founded in 1998 as a collaboration between me, Steve Landau, a product designer, and Karen Gorgi, a blind educator at City University of New York, who mentored me. So I met her and we started collaborating on various things. She was the first blind person that I ever met, and she was very instrumental in helping me get things started. The company focuses on audio tactile interactives, which are exhibits, maps, and classroom aids that provide audio descriptions in response to localized touches on raised line and textured graphic overlays. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. Here's the very first audio tactile tablet. This was called the Nomad. It was first developed by an Australian professor of geography named Don Parks in the early 1990s. It was a very crude device. In some ways, it ran on a computer that was running DOS, which was this very early operating system for PCs. The idea is that you have this tray or surface that allows you to mount a tactile graphic overlay. This one has some clamps, these two little yellow levers in the upper left and lower right corners, where you would place the sheet into this device and hit those clamps, and that would hold the piece in place. Kind of a clunky system. There's also had an internal speaker and a volume knob. And this was developed and marketed by American Printing House for the Blind. Dr. Parks came to America and stayed in Louisville, where APH is located, and worked with them to develop the product. They did create a whole bunch of content for it, but like many assistive devices, it was ahead of its time and didn't succeed commercially. It disappeared with very little trace. But the germ had been laid. It was just a matter of other people realizing the power of this idea, because without audio tactile interactivity, reading tactile graphics is exceedingly difficult and really can only be done by a very small audience. When you add audio labeling, you can touch anything on this surface and it will describe it to you. Then all of a sudden you don't need to have braille labels, and that means that the graphic can be much simpler and have much more detail at the same time. So it's a really useful concept. After that, Freedom Scientific, which is a conglomerate in the assistive technology field, collaborated with Sally Mangold, who was a well-known author of a Braille course called the Mangold System for Learning Braille. She invented this device, which was called SAL, and it stood for Speech Assisted Learning. And this was only for learning Braille. So you had a same concept. You had a tray, which had a touch screen built into it. You had overlay sheets, which were placed on it. But here you see that a lot of new features have been added. This product was super sophisticated and quite amazing, but it never succeeded in the market, partly because it was very expensive. It cost about $4,000. The good thing about this device was that it was a self-contained unit. You didn't have to plug it into a computer. It had its own internal speaker and audio system. And it also had a really interesting method of holding the sheets in place, because that's very important. The overlay sheets have to be held so they don't slide around. The other big problem is, how does the device know which tablet, which overlay sheet has been put onto it? In the SAL device, what they did was put in a barcode reader inside the device, and they used that to scan a QR code or a barcode on the back of the sheet. So when you place the sheet into that holder, the barcode was on the back. It was lined up with the scanner. It looked at the barcode, identified the sheet, and it started speaking and identifies which sheet you placed in there and what you're supposed to do. Another thing that this device included was a Braille keyboard, which is extremely useful when you're doing Braille lessons, because then you can have writing activities as well as reading. But the sheets that were placed on this device were made out of paper and embossed on a Braille embosser. They weren't really suitable for tactile graphics. And also, the touchscreen was very granular. It had a very poor resolution because it was only for Braille. It was broken up into rectangles the size of Braille cells, as opposed to standard touchscreens, which are high resolution, similar to video. This product was not really suitable for putting a tactile graphic onto it because it didn't have adequate tactile spatial resolution to press on fine details of a tactile graphic and have it know a specific spot where you were pressing. But this product was extremely influential in my thinking and my design. I always was a great admirer of this piece. What's interesting, and we're going to see later, is that many of the innovations of this tablet actually came back to me. And our latest version is very similar to this unit. I want you to remember that when we get to that point in the presentation, that this unit actually is kind of the model, even though it was done around 2003, they already had solved many of the problems that we struggled with later. Karen and I brought out the TTT as a successor to the Nomad because we wanted to focus on tactile graphics, not just Braille. We developed this device, which is extremely minimalist. It's simply a metal tray with a hinged frame, and you can place tactile overlays under that frame. You open the frame, drop it in, close the frame, and that holds the sheet. It was plugged into a computer, so it wasn't very portable. It didn't have that cool sheet recognition system that SAL had, where it read barcode from inside the device. So instead, we developed a tactile graphic user interface, simple set of graphic elements that appeared on every overlay sheet. So on this picture that I have on the presentation now, I'm showing a map of the United Kingdom on the TTT, Talking Tactile Tablet, nicknamed it. You can see that across the top edge of the sheet, there's a long horizontal stripe, like a raised line, with 3 short vertical bars positioned along that stripe. When you place the sheet in there, you heard a prompt that instructed you to slide your finger from left to right across that strip and pause at each one of those bars to press down. That registered a 3-digit code that could identify the sheet to the computer. There's only 24 possible positions of those bars because they had to be far enough apart that we wouldn't have overlaps or misidentification. So with 24, you can multiply, the cube, 24 times 24 times 24 factorial is the mathematical term to calculate how many combinations were available of ID codes. It seems like it would be a lot, but actually it wasn't enough. The downfall of this product was insufficient namespace. It seemed like a small issue, but it turned out to be a killer. And we realized that we couldn't really build the catalog to the point where we needed to develop a body of content that would entice new users. Even though this product was quite successful, we sold 1,200 of them across the lifetime. I realized that we had to give it up and eventually come up with something new. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we developed this tactile graphic user interface. In addition to the ID strip, there were other elements that we determined were necessary to operate all of the applications. And the picture that I'm showing now, there's an overlay sheet which is explaining something about trigonometry. There's an XY coordinate grid, the line labeled hypotenuse, and some angles marked. Anyway, that's just an example of the kind of pictures that we like to present. In addition to that, there's a plus sign in the upper right corner, which acts as the quit button. So like the escape on a keyboard. If you press that button and release it, it would go to the main menu. If you press that button and held it for 3 seconds, it would assume that you wanted to change to a new sheet, and it would prompt you to open the frame, remove the sheet, and it would go into the hold pattern. I wanted to show this so you'd see there's a basic layout for the sheets that is really important because tactile readers like consistency. It's harder to adapt quickly to interfaces that shift and move around and change. We try hard to be extremely rigorous about the consistency of this layout. You'll see it has evolved in interesting ways. Everything is developing over the years in response to what we're learning from our users. We do tons of studies and research, got a lot of grants, some done with Josh Mealy, he's on the call. We really focus a lot on these incremental improvements. Nothing that we're doing is revolutionary. The revolution was started by Don Parks when he first came up with the idea. And we have been just improving it. But that's really the nature of design, I would say. There's very few things that are completely revolutionary. Most things are incremental improvements. And this is an example of that. Meanwhile, others recognized the power of the idea. Our competitor, View Plus, who is a manufacturer of braille embossers, about the same time as the TTT came out, they introduced IVEO, which is almost the same thing. It also connected to a computer. It had a different kind of a clamping mechanism. You can see that there's a piece at the top, hinged element, which I think you would open and then you would close that and it would hold the sheet. But actually, I always found that to be a bad design choice because in those days, we were doing a lot of vacuum forming to make tactile graphics. And that process tends to produce a fairly wavy, non-flat sort of sheet. So you really can't use the IVEO with anything but paper overlays because it doesn't have an ability to hold the sheet on all 4 edges, which you need to do if the material is not totally flat. But they developed this product to support their other product line, which is braille embossers. So they were focused on paper, braille, and paper and tactile graphics made on paper. They didn't have the same constraint that I did because I'm not happy with settling for embossed tactile graphics. They're really not as good. They don't have smooth curves and diagonal lines, and they don't have the same resolution. So they can't be visual very easily. It's not easy to print visual graphics. My focus is much more on universal access and trying to make things so that sighted users, sighted teachers, for example, or peers in the classroom are not in the dark about what the blind kid is doing. Everything is multisensory. We don't like things that are only tactile. That's kind of a philosophical matter, and people may disagree on that. But from a marketing perspective, it's really important to have access for everyone, even if even if sighted users are not our main customer base. We know that they participate, and there's something othering about Braille that has no print on it. It feels very exclusive to blind people, and I understand that that's okay. Paper Braille is great, but that wasn't what I was trying to do. So, meanwhile, since it's such a good idea, we were also busily trying to come up with better solutions that are not tactile tablets, but accomplish the same result, which is that you can take a tactile graphic and you can basically interrogate it using some form of computational technology that allows you to either touch on it or tap on a graphic and hear a specific description about the element or thing that you touched. It's not enough just to have an overview of a picture. You need to be able to actually query the picture, ask, what is this? And that's the process of learning the tactile graphic. It doesn't come all at once the way visual diagrams can, or visual illustrations can. It's always a kind of cumulative experience. And so, having this self-describing feature is extremely good. When I was at CSUN conference sometime in the 2010 maybe, that's the place where all of the the movers and the shakers and the accessibility world get together every year, and they have a lot of meetings in hotel rooms. One of those meetings took place in Josh Neely's room, and he pulled out this weird looking fountain pen-ish thing and demonstrated how you could take that pen and tap it on a map of the United States, and it would speak the name of any state that you tapped on. For me, that was both a shattering realization that my product was cooked and that it could never compete against this pen, because the pen is so portable, it's so inexpensive. Who would buy a clunky metal tablet and connect it to a computer and have speakers and all that stuff if you could just have the whole thing in your shirt pocket? So it was one of those shattering moments. At the same time, I was just so pumped by that, because I had never thought about it, but it's so obvious. Josh and I decided to pursue the development of the talking tactile pen, and it ended up becoming a commercial product sold by American Printing House. We sold 5,000 of them, which is quite a lot. However, another shattering lesson of that experience was relying on third-party technologies is sometimes a very dangerous thing to do, because what happened was that the LiveScribe company who developed and marketed the talking pen decided that they don't care about our audience because it's too few. We weren't selling that many. So they basically announced end of life on the Pulse pen that we had been developing. And so I had to break the news to APH that one of their best-selling products was going to disappear. That was quite painful. And it's another lesson that I learned that I think I'm hoping to avoid going forward. So I'm very skeptical about ever relying on a product that's not, easily acquired from many different sources. We're going to play this short video, which is Josh actually demonstrating the talking tactile pen.
An audio-tactile periodic table for blind students based on LiveScribe's Pulse Smart Pen.
Hi, I'm Josh Mealy. I'm a scientist at the Smith Kettlewell Eye Research Institute. We've developed a bunch of tools based on the LiveScribe Pulse Smart Pen, and these tools are unusual in that we're intending them to be used by blind people in order to get them better access and better success in STEM areas. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We've developed a very cool audio-tactile periodic table, as well as a scientific calculator and even a Sudoku game, which all can be used in conjunction with the LiveScribe Smart Pen, so that a blind person can touch the periodic table, feel the markings on it, feel the braille on it, and be able to use the Pulse pen to touch different parts of that table to find out different things about the different elements on it. Let me show you what I mean.
Hydrogen, lithium, sodium, potassium.
What we've done is to layer the information so that the first time you tap on one of the elements, it tells you what element you've tapped.
Iron, symbol, capital F.
As you tap more and more, it tells you more and more information.
Atomic weight, density of STP, melting point.
This is way more information than you would ever be able to squeeze onto a small periodic table in Braille.
So I wanted to show that because I think the idea of layering is very important, and it's another sort of thing that I discovered from working with lots of users, that having a consistent layering structure makes it much more accessible when you have a lot of information that you're trying to deliver, like the periodic table. This idea about drilling down by tapping again on the same feature is really intuitive. Doesn't take any explanation. People get it right away. And it really helps in getting people to be aware of where they are in the informational structure. That kind of consistency is crucial. There are other products also in this category. This is a picture of a really cool tactile drawing system developed by Jaap Reader in the Netherlands. He also was developing a pen-based tool, but his technology was discontinued, so he had to give up on the idea of audio tactile. It's very interesting to see how, he's a blind guy, and he's really wants to make tools for creating. So that's another important lesson that I absorbed from my experiences in this community, is that people were not satisfied with tools that were all about consuming and information access. They were extremely desirous to have tools that supported creating and making and drawing. That's actually an area I've been focusing on a lot lately. Jaap's system was a big inspiration to me because he was personally, sort of desirous of having these tools, and he made them. And that's the best way to do it. As the technology advances, tactile tablets are evolving. In 2020, Touch Graphics introduced the T3 tactile tablet, and this device is kind of the direct successor to the TTT, and that's why it's called T3. The way that this improved on the TTT were, first of all, that you no longer had to swipe that strip across the top to identify the sheet. Instead, we used an Android tablet, off-the-shelf digital signage device, which is similar to the kind of touchscreens that you see in fast food restaurants for ordering. It's a very low-cost device manufactured in large quantities overseas, and we import them. And then to make the T3, we added a couple of components. We added 3 metal pins on the left edge, which allow you to place overlay sheets onto the tablet. They're held in place by the 3 pins. Those are the same holes that also allow you to store your sheets in a binder. So the holes were already sheets. We just added the pins mounted to the glass surface so that it would hold that sheet in the right place. That's a very crucial thing. if it's off by even a couple of millimeters, things won't line up. The whole experience is extremely frustrating. The other thing that we added was this metal, we call it the mirror hood. This is another thing that I came up with. Well, I didn't come up with, but I was brainstorming with Josh. I was pulled over on the side of the road in Chicago, and I was lamenting that I could not figure out how to read a QR code from a tablet because, I wanted to use the camera that's built into the tablet to save money, and not have to have another device, a QR code reader. But we were too close to the camera. You need enough focal distance to take a picture of the QR code. So Josh suggested using a mirror mounted above the camera so that the camera would take a picture of the mirror, and in the mirror it would see the reflection of the QR code. And so we ended up creating this stainless steel hood which holds the mirror on the bottom surface. You can't see it in this picture, but there's a 1-inch square mirror. The camera is right below it. It did work. That was our solution, and a good idea. It was kind of clunky and stuck out in a weird way, and added cost because we had to make a custom part. I was never totally satisfied with it. Also, the camera in the tablet is not that good at photographing QR codes. There's devices, for that purpose, which are much more reliable. But I didn't know that at the time and made that error. We switched everything over to Android because it's an Android tablet, and that means that it's all in the cloud. So that's kind of a nice feature, that everything was downloaded on demand, including the audio files needed to run the apps. You could get a new overlay sheet, place it on there. If it wasn't currently present, it would actually download it transparently from the cloud. But you did obviously have to be connected to Wi-Fi, and connecting to Wi-Fi turned out to be harder than we thought because, it requires the use of the Android screen reader, and this device isn't really that good for using that because it lacks on volume up and down buttons. Anyway, it's a complicated issue, but this product did not sell particularly well. We've sold some of them, but I'm not exactly sure why, because we did develop quite a bit of content. We made a Braille course, which includes UEB Braille, the latest version. It's very comprehensive. We made an atlas of the world for the T3. We made a T3 solar system, which shows photographs of all the planets and interesting commentary by astronomers. We made a children's book, Anne Cunningham's Critters, which is a series of bas-relief images that you place on the tablet and hear the animal sounds, and it's really fun. This is a picture of one of the Braille sheets. We also made a program called T3 Games, which is it's supposed to be fun, and it is fun, but it's actually a course in how to read tactile graphics, and so it introduces basic concepts and builds up your vocabulary and knowledge and skills to the point where you can play this baseball game and do other fun activities. Now we're at the end. This is the T3 Surface. This is the latest thing. I'm just working on it right now. And what's funny about this is that it kind of goes back to the very early SAL device, but you can also see remnants and little elements of our TT in here as well. What we've done is created this very simple wooden box, which holds a bezel on the top. That bezel has a rectangular cutout, which is 11 by 11.5 inches. And it's just the right size to drop a piece of Braille paper in there. These days, we're not doing vacuum forming anymore. We're using UV printing, which creates very flat tactile media, tactile overlay. So we don't really need a clamp or any kind of frame. The sheets just drop into that depressed area on the bezel, and they stay there very nicely, doesn't move around. The other thing that you may notice is that we still have the X shape or the plus. Remember, I said in the original tactile graphic user interface, you had a symbol in the upper right corner, which served as a quit button. Below that, we still have a joystick control, which consists of a circle and 4 radiating lines, which you use to navigate menus and make selections. Those are holdovers from our original interface. We found out that people don't really like scrolling through menus and hitting enter all the time because it's cumbersome. And there's some things that you want to change a lot. So for example, adjusting the volume and the speech rate is something that people want to have very ready access to. So we made 2 vertical sliding finger troughs right below the joystick control. You run your finger up and down in those slots, and it immediately raises and lowers the volume, or the one on the right raises and lowers the speech rate. Those became obvious from seeing people struggle with menus. It's just clunky. So exposing that to making these kinds of permanent controls on the surface is an obvious improvement. Other things that this device does is that it no longer requires a computer because it's actually got its own Raspberry Pi built in. And the Raspberry Pi is a very generic product that does not rely on any one startup company to ensure that it continues to be available. It's made by a consortium of people and groups, and it's manufactured in Wales, which means that we don't have tariffs, fortunately. So that's another reason why we moved away. I know that sounds like giving in to insanity, but in business, you have to do that. So, when the price of the tablets doubled, I really had to think hard about whether we were going to be able to continue with that. Switching over, and this was something also that Yop showed me, how you could use Raspberry Pi to make simple, low volume devices that can be really powerful. So what this has inside is a Raspberry Pi. It has a battery, an audio amplifier, speakers, a touchscreen controller, a QR code scanner, and a mirror on a 45-degree angle. The QR code scanner is pointed at the mirror, which bounces the image up. Instead of coming down from the mirror hood, we're going through a transparent rectangular spot in the upper right corner of every overlay. That's where we put the QR code on the back. It goes all the way back to SAL. That was the way they were doing it in SAL. We came back to that 20 years later. But it's much better because now you don't have that big overhanging piece which blocks your hand, and it's just kind of ugly. So it's all very streamlined now. It's still in a prototype phase, but we're very close to commercializing this device. And the amazing part is that the cost is going to be half of what it was, what the original TTT was, even at fairly low volumes. We're using very off-the-shelf components, so nothing is custom except for this bezel, which I'm just cutting on a laser cutter. I can do all of this internally and then just buy the components and wire it all up. My focus is on making the tactile media and creating the apps. I want the product to be something that I can eventually farm out to a manufacturer. We have to prototype everything because that's just the way it is. No one will do it for you. You have to start from scratch and build it. Once you have a working prototype, you can get someone to manufacture it either overseas or here. We're at that stage now where we're doing user studies and working with Josh on refining the menu structures, improving the accuracy and precision of the touch responsiveness, and massaging other aspects of the user experience. Lindsay is going to be helping us with that to perfect it. We should be ready to begin marketing this by the spring. So that's where we are. After 25 years of continuous improvements, the audio tactile tablet has evolved. In each new iteration, we incorporate solutions to problems identified by studying our users and asking a lot of questions without assuming to know the answers in advance.
You recently won an award, right? The Touch of Genius, is that what it was called?
Well, yeah, we got the Touch of Genius twice. The first one was when me and Karen first developed the TTT, And we got the very first Touch of Genius award. And then I got it again for the T3. That was last year. You can see there's quite a time span in between. This is the concept. This is my little touch of genius, I guess, as Josh will say, just a touch, not much. It's been my life's work and a very satisfying experience, especially because it does get better, and it has been very frustrating and painful at times, and it's still frustrating and painful. I'm not sure there's any solution to that. It seems like it's a prerequisite to life in general, I think.
Well, thank you so much. We'll open it up to questions, and I'll just say that it's really amazing to see the levels that you're working at as a businessman, as an entrepreneur, as somebody who is having to bootstrap and build this knowledge base at the same time as being so refined in the design and your strategy. So it's amazing to see it all together. We've got 10 minutes here for questions.
Thank you for saying that. There are many other people involved with this, and many of them are on this call. Gina Klepper, for example, was instrumental in developing the T3 apps. And Josh Mealy was my great collaborator and friend. Ann Cunningham created a lot of our content. It's not a one-man operation, and I've been really lucky to have met the right people along the way, including Lindsay.
Absolutely. Does anybody who has contributed want to chime in or ask any questions?
This is Marco.
Hey, Marco.
Thanks, Marco.
Hey, Steve. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to trying out this new Surface. Does it still have the tactile drawing creation tool that you were working on that goes out to the embosser?
Yes and no. I have these developers called EQware, and they made the T3 Creator, which I was about to actually talk about, but sort of ran out of time. Marco was helpful in some of the early work on the T3 Creator, which is a program that allows you to draw using your finger and then output a drawing on a Braille embosser, which is connected to the T3 via the USB cable. So it was pretty interesting. You would be able to make a graphic and then add your own audio label to it. And then, you could publish that, print it out, share it with other people. And it's quite interesting. And we actually did a lot of prototyping, and it does work. The problem is that was developed for Android. And so while, we know what we want it to do, we now have the not insignificant task of porting everything over to Python, which is the scripting language we're using with Raspberry Pi. It's an open source programming language that's very popular, and many people know it. We realized we want everything to be open source. We're going to Raspberry Pi, so we have to convert everything. I can't really speak to the difficulty because I didn't program it originally, but the good thing is that we now have the opportunity to make improvements. Marco's, someone who's really involved in tactile making, tactile drawing. It would be helpful to get your input about things that you would like to see improved or added to that T3 Creator when it does get ported over to the new programming language.
Great, thanks so much. Christina, I saw your hand up.
Well, it was something similar. I wanted to ask if you are adding, maybe it's not the same, the authoring tool.
Yeah. So the authoring tool and the T3 Creator are kind of the same thing. The idea, and I'm, because there seems to be a lot of interest there, let me breeze through a couple of these illustrations. These were pictures made by a blind student in Jessica McDowell's class in Marin County. This kid was obsessed with these monsters, and they produced these on swell paper, and then they labeled them using the T3. So the TTT authoring tool similarly was intended for use by someone who already had a tactile graphic and just wanted to label it. You would place a pre-made tactile picture on the tablet, and you would take your finger and trace around each shape and then speak into a microphone or type into a keyboard what you wanted to say. But the T authoring tool was not a drawing system. It wasn't actually giving you that ability to output to draw something or to embellish a tactile graphic by just tracing something with a stylus or with your finger, and then, hitting the button to output it to the embosser. But in the case of this student, he was using it with his own pictures that he made with wallpaper. This was another illustration that Jessica produced for her student. This is showing how you can take, an existing tactile overlay that was made by someone else and tape it down to a template and then, again, label it with audio. Someone made a tactile version of the Audacity tactile graphic user interface, which is a popular audio editing program. This is something that Ann Cunningham made, that she did blindfolded. We wanted to test how an artist would draw tactily and then label it with audio. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
And Josh, I see your hand.
Hey, Steve, you don't just have a touch of genius, you have a lot of genius. I'm always amazed at how much you've gotten done. Even though you mostly focused on the physical industrial design of the product, there's a whole other dimension to your creative exploration around the user interaction. The earliest tablets you used were resistive and were actually capable of detecting different levels of pressure. You've experimented with figuring out how to make a graphic that you can touch and explore without having it constantly talking at you, and balancing the need to be able to interrogate individual parts of the graphic with the need to keep it quiet when you're not wanting that. And just to go into one more thing, I mean, the sensitivity, being able to, the size of the touch target that you have to create is not the same as the size of the physical tactile.
Right.
You have to make the touch target bigger. And there's all of these different things that you've really focused in on and worked on. Folks, this is not a competition per se. We want the best possible product, but many other products don't take into consideration these critical elements of user experience that you've refined and continue to refine. I wanted to get at this whole area of design that's not physical, but around the user interaction.
That's so true. And I didn't raise it because I thought it was too much for a short presentation, but the whole question of gesture has been crucial. One of the problems is that gesture is used by blind people for access to their iPhones, and that paradigm is the voiceover method, where you explore with audio feedback and then double tap anywhere to activate the speech. That I decided that even though that's something that's very familiar to every blind user of an iPhone, I decided that I couldn't use that, because that's a very counterintuitive way to think about interacting with a device for anyone else. I know that decision annoyed people because they said, why don't you just do it this way, because we're all used to it. I didn't want to, but the answer turned out to be that we were just using the wrong piece of hardware. The decision to go to capacitive 10-finger touch, which is used in every single Android device, turned out to be problematic, because if you're touching with all of your fingers, as Josh said, you don't want it to talk at all. You have to explore in silence with multiple hands and fingers, but then you want to make it very easy to know which thing you want it to describe or identify. The only way that was possible to do that without the sort of voiceover paradigm was to keep one finger in place and lift your other fingers. The screen could detect all 10 fingertips, so it doesn't, when you're touching with both hands, it doesn't know which thing you want to know about. So we required you to learn this gesture, which I thought was learnable. After watching people struggle with that, I realized it was a big mistake. And, I lost many years and some reputation, I would say, from that mistake, because, resistive touchscreens have always been available and are still available. And so when because, necessity is the mother of invention, when I realized that we just weren't selling any of these devices, we had to basically go back to the future, realize that we can get these resistive 1-point touchscreens really cheaply. They're still available. I thought they were obsolete. but that was ignorant on my part. In business, you can make really serious errors. So it's a lot more impactful that you make a mistake on something where you're not actually suffering the consequences.
Well, Steve, there's so much tacit knowledge as well as this really concrete sharing that you've done that I think many of the folks in this group are interested in thinking about how do we actually create viable businesses to really build up the assets. Thanks so much for sharing your journey in this case study. It's been great to have you here. And, just talking about being intrepid and your intrepidness, I'll use that as a way to introduce next month. We're going to have the session on the 8th. The second Thursday, we'll have Ian Maddie and Charlotte Martin from Braille Forward and the Intrepid Museum in New York City, and thinking about, Braille in the, an app that they're developing, their involvement in the Intrepid Museum's accessibility around their exhibits. So we hope to have you all join us next month. And Steve, thanks again. Steve had shared his contact information, so please feel free to reach out to him.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Steve.
For listening.
Yep.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks very much.